Hi, and welcome to Science by Redifer. Thank you for checking out this lesson. It is actually kind of a mini project, I would say. And this is part of Unit 2 of my year-long video production curriculum that I am in the process of uploading to my store. So Unit 1 was all about camera angles and the basics of, working a camera. And then now we're getting into more like fleshing out history of film. Now, for this project, because it is just a little bit more complicated, I have decided to film um, and like narrate through basically all that I do for this because there are a lot of moving pieces, but once you get it rolling, it is just so much fun. The kids really enjoy it, and it's a really cool lesson that I created. So, students do need to work with a partner for this because it's a big deal. Number one, they're going to be standing in front of the class. Number two, they're going to be teaching a 15-minute lesson. And maybe if you have a very confident, strong student who is capable of doing this on their own and you believe that they can do it on their own, then sure, but I make them have a partner because it is nerve-wracking to stand in front of the class, let alone teach a 15-minute lesson, for my middle schoolers at least. I did give about 2 to 3 days for the research portion, and we'll talk about this step by step. I'll try and go through it as quickly as possible. So basically, in this, they are going to take a decade, and then they're going to research the major inventions. How did those inventions change the film industry? They need to give one example film that they're going to show to the class to show, like, what did film look like in that era. Um, and they also need to give an assessment, but it's not as rough as it sounds. So we're going to go into it. Before I begin, though, I do have a calendar, and this is, basically 2 groups will teach each day. And I noticed that that's as much as I tried to get through 3 groups a day, and it just didn't work out. So 2 groups, that's 30 minutes, but it takes them time to get set up. And, if you have an in question and an out question and all of that type of stuff, it takes time. And it takes time for the kids to do the assessments of each lesson. So 15-20 minutes per lesson is what I would allocate for, and it's about 2 groups per day. So I have like a little example calendar right here. I'll zoom in. So as you can see, it takes about 8 days, sorry, 8 days, if you're going to do all of the different decades. Now, if you have a small class size, or you're like, I do not want to spend all this time, 7, 8 days on this, um, then you can combine 1860s and 1870s and 1880 and 1890 together. So one group will have to do 2 decades. But this could be advanced students who can handle that. But honestly, not too much is happening in the film industry in the beginning. So those are my suggestions on where to cut if you need more time. I am going to get into my example lesson uh, later. So part 1, you're going to introduce the project to the students. You're going to tell them, don't freak out. You're going to develop a 15-minute lesson plan. um and you're going to tell them everything that they need to include in their lesson plan, and then they start their research. The research really doesn't take that long, maybe a day. So they write in here, and what you could do is copy and paste this into a Google form, or if you're old school and you want to print it out and have them write stuff, that's fine. But I had my kids do it in a Google form, and you'll see what it looks like in a little bit here. So I get into the decade. What decade are they researching? They need to have at least 3 inventions, but major inventions, you can tweak that. It could also be um, changes in the film industry, and we'll talk about that because not every decade has 3 major inventions. Then we're going to get into the significance. Why was this invention / modification or change important? And then they do need to include one example film, and they can just go on YouTube and find that. So here's an example of what what their research form will look like at the end. As you can see here, my example is from 1910. Now, like I was saying, the cinema color projector was the major invention, but there's also this thing called the iris shot and indoor lighting. We don't think of those as major inventions. They could be things like changes. For instance, the iris shot was basically this circular mask that opened or closed um the device, and it gives the film this type of a effect. And then the lighting, well, prior to the 1910s, filmmakers primarily filmed outdoors, and in the 1910s the use of artificial light and whatnot became popular. So that's not exactly an invention, it's more of a like a modification or a change. But that's just an example of what a student could do if they can't find three major inventions. And then here's my example film, and I have the link. Make sure they put the link in, or at least the name. Okay, so let's go jump back into my lesson plan. And the next part is the lesson plan for your students. So you're going to print this document out for your students. You're going to go over what is your guys' lesson objective? What method will you teach this in? What film will you show the class? They should already have that in the research part, but I like them to put it again. How do you know the class understood what you taught them? They could give a small quiz. They could check notes and stamp notes. The kids loved it when I gave them my stamp and I said, okay, you guys, you can go around and stamp notes. It's up to the student what their assessment is going to be, but they need to have some type of assessment. Some groups, sorry, did exit tickets. So a worksheet, and they had to grade it, and I'll get into that in a little bit as well. So jumping to my example, I have my example lesson plan here, and again, the link is in the lesson plan document, but they have I have my objective. Okay, I'm gonna use Google Slides. Most groups choose Google Slides. I only had like one or two groups do a skit or lecture. There's my link to my silent film that I'm going to show from 1910. And then for an assessment, it could be as simple as we will stamp the class, oopsie, typo, sorry. We will stamp the class notes to make sure they understand our lesson. Uh, we will also have an exit thought. Some groups want to have, two different assessments, but they only need one. And then to show you kind of um, what a Google slide might look like. As soon as this loads here, I have my fake student names, Joey, Rachel, and Michelle there. I talk about the iris shot. I talk about indoor lighting. As you can see why this only takes 15 minutes. It's really quick, right? And then I would give my little assessment and I'd have time. Joey, Rachel, and Michelle would go around with the stamp and stamp people's notes, which we'll get into in a little bit. But all of this is with you. Here's the link to the Google slide presentations. And for you to get my example lesson, it's all the way up here and it says my example lesson for you to see. So it's all here and the link is open to anyone to see. Now, talking about history of film notes. So this is all set up for you. On the days that people are teaching, your students are taking notes and they will be turning this paper into you. So the class will be taking notes on each decade. So like for instance, 1860, they'll write the names of the students who taught this. They'll write the major inventions in, the significance, the name of the film example. Why do I do this? Because I notice that if kids are not, at least in my classes, if kids are not taking notes during a presentation, number one, they're not really paying attention. Number two, they don't remember stuff. And so this is important for students. So I have all the decades listed out and just this guided note sheet for you to print out for your class when the presentations begin. Now, a couple of just to tie up some loose ends. So, Number one, groups are responsible for grading the assessments and turning those scores into the teacher. So they need to grade everything. They need to give the stack of, like, say kids do work, decided to do a worksheet for their assessment. They need to turn those worksheets into you graded, and then you can enter them into the grade book or however you want to do that. I do now, this is kind of how I break this up. So this part right here, the decade and the research part, students need to turn that into me and get their lesson plan approved. And I look over it and I'll say, okay, like this activity that you're planning on doing is going to take longer than 15 minutes, or this activity is a little going to be a little bit too hard. I tweak it and I give them, I tell them like, okay, these are some changes that you might need to make. Once I approve the lessons, students can begin creating their lesson and they can begin creating their Google Slides, their worksheet, whatever it is that they want to make for the lesson. I did announce, the other thing is to keep it organized and let people know when they're presenting, because there's always somebody who's absent. Guess what? If your partner's absent, you're teaching anyway, okay? So just announce that beforehand. If you're absent, you're teaching anyway. Your group is teaching anyway. So please be here for your group's presentation. And to keep them all nice and organized, I made like a little calendar and I would let people know ahead of time. Like I would say, okay, today we've got 18 Monday, you guys, we have the 1860 group and the 1870 group going, and then Tuesday 1880, 1890, and then so they would know when they were presenting. But everybody had to submit their lesson, their assessment, all of that, um at the same time. So say for instance, here on my calendar, everything was due Friday. So I gave them Wednesday, Thursday, Friday to work on their lesson plan, their assessment, and whatnot. Everybody has to turn it in on Friday. Your lesson has to be done on Friday. You cannot tweak things. You cannot go, can't go back and change something. Um, just to keep it nice and organized and to be fair, because as you can see here, the people going in the 2010s, it's not fair that they have an extra 7 days to work on their project when everybody else, the 1860, 1870 group had to turn it in on Monday. So also, another suggestion, pro tip, is that you keep the assessments. So, for instance, if a student needed to print something out, they had to share that Google Doc with me. And then I would print out enough copies for the class, um, but I would keep it. I kept everything until the day of their presentation, because students, at least in middle school, will definitely lose their stuff. So don't give them like the 30 copies of their worksheet beforehand. Just give it to them day of the presentation, like as they're going up to present, say, "Oh, here's your worksheets," and then they can pass it out to the class however they want. But that's a pro tip. Um, Trying to think of what else I did for this project. If you have any questions for me, because this is a little bit complicated, please feel free to reach out and I will help you as best as I can. My email is biancajj1@gmail.com. And actually, I should probably include that in here because, like I said, this is a little bit complicated. So, feel free to reach out to my TPT store, or better yet, my email, and I can help you if you're confused about how I did this lesson. But hopefully, this video helped you. Have a wonderful day, and I hope you check out more of my units, my video production units, and also my science units. Thank you.